All right, we're live. Happy Wednesday to everybody out there. Welcome to this week's Fire Engineering Humpday Hangout. And we've got an interesting lineup this week. For those of you that watch this on a regular basis, you'll see that the group from the UL Firefighter Safety Research Institute pops in here every now and then. We've got the fifth Wednesday of every month, and not every month has a fifth Wednesday, so we fill in where we can. And for those of you that haven't been watching this month, I just want to highlight real quick the last week, Frank Ricci and Steve Hamilton talking about scenes of violence. Great there. Before that, Rick Lasky and his guests with Love of the Job. If you haven't seen that one yet, definitely check that one out. Gustin, Dugan, and all their guests, real sharp crew there talking about basement fires, a topic that we've been paying a lot of close attention to as we've got a big basement fire project that we're working on right now with the International Society of Fire Service Instructors. And then speaking of which, the first of the month goes back to Brad French and his guests, where they were talking about the training considerations and the challenges that you have with tech rescue and hazmat and special responses like that. So please go back in the archive, check those out, and hopefully we can end up the month real good here in March. So as we get started here, the group here in the room with me in Columbia, Maryland, we've got Craig Weinschenk, research engineer that joined us in October of last year. Yep. And brought with him the topic that we're going to be talking about today that we're really excited to talk about, which is data in the fire service and FireCares. We're going to introduce you to that. Next to Craig, Robin Zevotek, our lead research engineer, who will be chiming in, and our special guest, Chief John Jerome from the Howard County Department of Fire Rescue Services, right here in our backyard. And since we moved our team to Maryland last year, they've been an unbelievable resource for us, a partner in everything that we do. We're actually working on burning some stuff at their training academy right now, and we've got a huge program coming up next week already, right? Next week, where Chief Jerome has been helping us with his master's degree in instructional design that he's working on, and helping us figure out how to, as we partner with the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, we're going to deliver a fire dynamics boot camp to, I think we have 48 people that have been invited to participate as training chiefs or safety chiefs from some of the largest fire departments around the country. So we're excited to have them visiting Chief Jerome's Training Academy here in Howard County. And we'll have more about that once we deliver that. Hopefully we get an opportunity to deliver that again and really get fire dynamics and the research results out there to the street in a way that's meaningful. And the goal is really to try and empower the attendees to be able to take it back and teach it to their departments, because there's only one Steve and Craig and Robin, and Dan's out teaching in Kansas City today. Otherwise he would have been with us as well. So hopefully we can empower some folks. So with that said, our topic of the day, data in the fire service and FireCares. And we are really lucky to be joined really by what I would consider who FireCares is, the core team that's taken a complex issue that we have in the fire service and is trying to give us tools that really make it meaningful and make it something that is what I feel is going to be revolutionary in the way that we look at data and use data going forward. So with that, I'll pitch it over to Craig. Why don't you introduce our guests?
So the two guests we have joining us today are Dr. Lori Moore-Merrell from the IAFF and Tyler Garner from Prominent Edge. So two of the main, Lori's kind of the visionary that's put this together over the last 10 years. And I'll let her kind of give a little more history on this whole project. And Tyler's our lead developer in terms of building all the infrastructure and making FireCares a success that we hope it will become. And so I'll turn it over to you guys to say hello. And then Lori, if you could give a little history of the project and how we've gotten to where we are today, that'd be fantastic.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be able to be with you today, and certainly with some of our great colleagues there with Steve and of course Craig is part of our team. So I will give you a little bit of history and then hand it over to Tyler to introduce himself a bit more and tell you a little history and how he joined our group. Basically, FireCares is a vision from the NIST studies that were done some years ago. Many of you may have heard of the NIST residential field experiments and the high-rise field experiments. Those two basically field studies sort of set the stage of where we're going with FireCares. Since about 2005, we've had a group together that consisted of a partnership of the IAFF, the IFC, NIST, of course, and thankfully now UL has joined our crew, but also we've had Worcester Polytechnic, we now have University of Texas at Austin, and Urban Institute with our statisticians. But this group has been together now since, as I said, 2005, to not only conduct the field experiments, but always looking toward being able to do something with risk assessment in communities, looking at how well departments match resources that are deployed to that risk environment and the potential risk events that could occur. And so everything that we've done in the field leading up to this time has contributed to building this new system. FireCares is a big data analytical system that basically leverages data from many aspects of life, really, that we can, once we layer all this together, tell something about the risk of fire. Once we can load in some information that we've been able to bring together from the fire side, we can tell something about fire department performance. Again, ultimately with the goal of seeing how well fire departments match resources deployed to the risk environment. So that's the basic premise for the FireCares system, is using this type of analytics. A little more history, and I'm going to hand it over to Tyler to do that, is the background of where we got the baseline geographic database to begin building this came from a project that Tyler was working on as a programmer with the Department of Defense. So Tyler, why don't you introduce a bit more of your background and tell us about Rogue and how that started really the FireCares.
Yeah, so hello everyone, my name is Tyler Garner. As Craig mentioned, I'm the kind of the lead software developer and kind of architect on the FireCares project. As Lori mentioned, FireCares, the application itself came from an application that I supported for the Army Geospatial Center called the Rogue project, which was a geospatial collaboration tool that allowed different organizations to work together to collaborate and generate geospatial data essentially and work on these layers together and stuff like that. And the Secretary of Defense gave us some funding to try to transition that project over to a civilian use case, which it just so happened that we met up with the IAFF. That's the one that the Secretary of Defense chose as the civilian use case. And it was kind of it from there. It worked kind of perfectly as a foundation. We identified a lot of resources that could be reused to support the FireCares platform. And then from there, we've just been customizing that platform in order to support all the additional functionalities that FireCares needs. You know, obviously this platform that was kind of meant for humanitarian aid and disaster response was much more general than the FireCares application that you see today. And so I guess the good news story out of this whole thing was that project for the DoD started as an open source project. And so this is an example of a government grant funded application that was open source that, you know, nobody could have articulated that it could have turned into something so powerful as the FireCares platform that we use today. So it's a really good news story. It's a great use of, you know, taxpayer dollars with a significant return on investment that's affected a lot of people so far. So that's kind of the history of the FireCares platform itself. But like I said, that was several years ago, and we've added several customizations today that are fire department and fire service specific. So it's come a long way from that point.
Well, and Tyler, you have a unique background that you didn't mention in the fire service as well. And I think that we talk about this all the time, is that the amount of firefighters that are out there that have these other talents that they're able to leverage both their love, their hobby, and their profession to really make this work. Give us a little bit more on that.
Yeah, and so I started out my career about 10 years ago with the Richmond Fire Department as a geospatial analyst. And so I worked there for several years, and that gave me kind of the firsthand experience of, all the challenges that are associated with just data analysis in the fire service. And I guess my biggest complaint was that, we were doing the exact same thing as every other fire department in the country was doing. We were trying to analyze the exact same things, and everybody had the exact same struggles. And so part of the FireCares project is really to streamline those workflows and identify the analytics that we can do in a central location and kind of remove the complexity for all these jurisdictions who at the end of the day want to see very similar statistics and data analysis. I've been volunteering since 2006, so I also have firsthand experience in the fire service just from an operational perspective as well. And I think that, again, that allows me to kind of see a lot of the challenges that our stakeholders see every single day, especially with technology in the fire service. It's just, there's so many different options out there. Every jurisdiction has, its own set of challenges. And so this project alone has really allowed us to kind of leverage a single grant to fix a problem and a challenge that a lot of departments face. So.
All right, Lori, so none of this happens we're hearing tons of partnerships. We're hearing unique opportunities that come about. How is the overall project funded? You mentioned since 2005. What's making this possible?
Well, it stems from, obviously, the Assistance to Firefighters grants under FEMA and Homeland Security. Those grants are vital to this type of work, as well as, a lot of the research that we're able to do. Back in 2005, AFG started awarding the very first research grants. It wasn't until then that we even had this opportunity. Prior to that, it was only for program implementation, and it was difficult to develop programs without money. So the path to get there was research. And so thankfully, we were able to use some of the AFG money for this type of work. So now developing programs, here we are since 2005, and our partnership has grown. The original partners that had the original stakeholders are still together, and we have fortunately been funded in perpetuity here for some of these this type of work, and always building on each other. So we have had standalone projects that contribute their own information, like the residential and the high-rise studies, but then leveraging that, always making something greater, which has led us really to the FireCares project, and of course the Enfors project that perhaps we can address before we close today.
So we're at a big milestone right here, right? We're hitting the streets with FireCares, and people can log in and people can gain access. Who wants to take that one? Lori, Craig?
Sure, I can start, and if I drift too far, Lori can jump in and correct me. But yes, firecares.org is currently live. So if you go to www.firecares.org, you can view the site, and there's kind of two levels of access. So there's a lot of FireCares that is always going to be publicly available to anyone who wants to see it. And then there's another layer that's designed specifically for the fire service. And so currently anyone who is an IAFC, so any fire chiefs within the departments can request a login through their login system, as well as officers in the IAFF. And then if not, you can go through the sign up process, and there's a whole discussion and directions on the website to direct you to how to sign up if you are interested in getting an account. And you can work with your local fire chief or representative to get an account to log in to see to expose all of the fire service specific information that we have on the site as well.
And there is a lot there. So let's talk about some of the, oh my gosh, it's pretty amazing. Let's talk about the analytics in the system. We all hear big data, we all hear all of those buzzwords and things like that, but here's an actual product that's hitting the street that's usable. So what's in it? What do we want our firefighters to use it for, our fire chiefs to use it for?
So I'll start that if I can, and then I'll hand some of the scores over to the guys to explain. First of all, CARES, and that may be something that we haven't addressed yet. CARES stands for Community Assessment Response Evaluation System. That's why we call it FireCares. So it has the premise, everything to do with, again, community risk assessment, looking at that environment, and in fact calculates a score for every community in the United States. within a geopolitical boundary. And that's something that before we end today, we'll talk more about how do fire departments get their data to us if it is not in there or is not accurate. Some of these data layers we had to build by hand and leverage over the last 3 years just to accumulate the data to calculate these scores. But that's the first score, is a community risk assessment score. And it takes into account historic fires in your jurisdiction, but also the basic structural infrastructure, your buildings, your parcels, building materials, the risk associated with your population, everything from density to numbers to socioeconomic demographics to ethnicity to age, all of those things down to some public health data like where smokers reside. So we start thinking about all of the data that's available publicly. It's a little bit creepy sometimes what we can find, but a lot of information can be gleaned together. And once we layer it, it begins to tell a story about the risk of fire. So that's one of the scores that's calculated, is this community risk assessment. And it's calculated in 3 categories. So the risk of fire spread, and then the risk of death and injury from fire. And so each community has these scores that exist, and it will put them in a low, medium, and high category based on their risk calculation. So that's the first score that it calculates. Then there are 2 other scores that are behind login. I should have said that community risk score, as Tyler talked about and Craig mentioned, some things are in public view on the site, others are behind login. Community risk is in public view. The other 2 scores are behind login and for department leadership. So Craig, why don't you talk about the performance score for fire departments and then how that correlates with the community risk assessment to calculate a safe grade.
Sure, and I'm just going to add a couple points on the community risk while we're on the topic. And so one of the things we did is when you're looking and trying to assess community risk, it's very hard to compare every community all at once, because smaller communities, you don't want to penalize a smaller community or penalize a larger community against a smaller community if they have no high rises. So comparing New York to, say, South River, New Jersey, where I'm from, you can't really compare them. And so what we did was we first kind of split the country based on NFPA region. So we have kind of the 4 NFPA regions. And then what we did was we split that even further based on population size. So based on the population that community protects, that's kind of how we break down the communities. And then within those bins, we compare the like communities against each other. So a similar sized population in the Northeast might have different risks than a population in the Southwest because of different construction, different age of those cities. We didn't want to have those elements being compared or penalized against one another. So it's more regional in size comparisons. And so then when you look at your community risk score, it's your community risk based on your similar departments. So we kind of rank it in 3 quartiles, so the top 25%, the medium 50%, and the bottom 25%. And so that's relative to your peers, how well are you doing in terms of your community's risk for these events from occurring? And so that's the foundation score. And then our performance score and safe grades are also based on the same kind of geographic and population breakdown. And so the performance score, we leverage a lot of Enfors here, and this is going to be my plea for everyone listening to put a lot of effort into filling out Enfors, especially the fire spread category, because that's important for me and some of the analytics that go on in FireCares. But when we look at the department, one of the things we wanted to do when we were first building this tool was, how do you assess, performance in a fire service? And it's a very challenging question. And the approach that we ended up taking was, well, if we look at the fire spread category, that kind of tells us, well, at least how big did these fires get? And so based on those 5 categories, we have object of origin, room of origin, floor of origin, structure of origin, and beyond structure. And we started to explore that data and realized that we couldn't just use all 5 categories, because based on the person filling out Enfors, that could drift a whole lot based on their perception. So what we ended up doing was breaking it down into 3 bins. We have a like room of origin, structure, and beyond. So you're either a smaller bin, a medium bin, and a large bin in terms of fire size. And if we accumulate that over time, we start to see a distribution. So how many of the fires in your community are small, how many of them are medium, and how many are large? And what we wanted to do was, well, if we know that's actually what's happening, what is kind of the idealized version? So assume everything was perfect. There was no traffic, staffing was completely full, everyone operated as one perfect cohesive unit, there was no radio communication issues. You name it, everything was perfect, everything was perfect. And so what we did was we modeled all of that out. We said if NFPA 1710 or 1720 says 90% of your time, your travel time should be 4 minutes or less to a fire. You have your time to turnout, your time to dispatch, your time to alarm, and then your time to water on fire. And so this is where we leverage some of the previous studies that this team has worked on from the NIST studies on high-rise and residentials. We know based on crew size in the ideal environment how long it should take to get water on fire once you arrive. And so we leveraged all of those things to get kind of a time that says from instance till water on fire, you have some time. And we know that everything on the fire ground really is a function of time. And so if we can couple that time that we're getting to a simple fire model, we could say, well, in the idealized sense, how big does this fire grow by the time you get water on fire? And we can then reconstruct that same distribution based on how big that fire was, whether it was in the room of origin, the floor of origin, or beyond the structure. And we get a lot of that information. This is where big data comes into play. So we're pulling from the American Housing Survey, we're pulling from census data, we're pulling from all sorts of other layers in order to determine what the approximate residential structure size might be, how big those rooms might be. And so we've got a whole lot of data feeding this, and essentially we can create a distribution that the idealized version of that department would look like. So how, if everything went perfect, how would their fires look like compared to what their actual fires are? And what we do is assessing those two distributions is how we come with a performance score, which is essentially how well you do relative to kind of the perfect version of yourself. So it's kind of a self-assessment, and then we can, again, compare that to like communities, determine how well that department is doing relative to its peers. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else to that, Lori, or I can then continue to the safe grade.
No, I think that was great, Craig. So it comes down to, again, now's the question. We've got a community risk score that stands alone. We've got a performance score that stands alone, but what's the real story? And I think that's the safe grade. So go ahead and tell about that comparison.
Yeah, so for the safe grade, what we did was we looked at, so if you've got a medium risk community, we wanted to say, well, within your like communities and with your same risk profile, because that's the types of fires you might be facing, how well does your performance score match that risk? So we know that there's certain inherent risks to your communities. And again, this is where we filter based on your community score, because we didn't want to compare a performance score for someone that's facing a high risk versus someone who's facing a low risk. They have different resources that they inherently staff with. And so that's why we wanted to bin them. And so your safe grade kind of reflects how well your performance score is compared to like departments that have the same risk profile. And then we also take this a step further and said, we have national safe grades as well. So for all the communities in your risk profile, how well do you rank on your performance score? So you do get that one step up as well to kind of see where you stand both on like departments and then larger departments.
Yeah, and also I think since we're talking about big data, also just kind of look at some of the numbers that we're working with here. So as far as actual fire departments that we do this analysis for, we have 27,000 fire departments in FireCares right now, over 50,000 fire stations that go along with those fire departments. We analyze about 40 million fires from Enfors right now, and that's just the fires. We don't analyze the EMS call volume yet. However, that's one of the things that we want to start doing in the near future, which will obviously make those numbers go up as well. And finally, we compare those fires to over 200 million parcels. So that's so we can identify additional risk attributes based on the location of where those fires occur. So these numbers will continue to go up over time, obviously, as more and more call volume goes in. And then we'll add additional data sets also that help us articulate risk for each one of these departments in each one of these individual incidents as well.
Yeah, so one of the things that stood out to me as I learned more about it and talked to Craig and get to interact with you is that we talk about those 40 million fires, and one of the things that amazed me was the GIS mapping of those 40 million fires, to be able to really add a dimension to this that's never been there before. Talk about that effort a little bit.
Yeah, and honestly, that's one of the probably the most complex parts of this, is because when you have 40 million records and you're using open source tools to kind of geolocate these, it's not a trivial task. And so honestly, that was one of the biggest challenges, is how do we effectively continuously get this? It's about 2 million calls a year, I believe, or 2 million fires a year. And so every year we take those, we have to geocode them, append them to our fire database that already exists. And then we run a host of different analytics based on that. So everything from, we identify the census tract that it occurs in, we identify obviously the departments. For some departments, we look at the response time distributions as well. And so essentially a host of analytics that we run after we get the geolocation. But that's one of the most, I would say, that's one of the biggest manual efforts that we have, and one of the biggest challenges when working with Enfors data is anybody who wants to do geospatial analysis on it has to do the same amount of work, and that is geocode these records. And oftentimes the records aren't even in a great format to geocode them. For example, some departments store the entire address in just a street name field, and then some separate them out into different columns. And so there's a tremendous amount of challenges. This kind of stuff seems pretty easy on its, at face value, but once you start looking into it, there's a lot of challenges. And then we even identify issues that once they are geocoded, the quality of the geocode. Some geocoders look at match the records to the center line, whereas we want parcel or rooftop hits, so that we can intersect that call with an actual structure and identify, based on the attributes of that structure, if there are additional risks associated with that call. So that's how we identify, for example, a high rise versus a non-high rise, or other attributes that help us say, hey, this structure is at whatever risk level it is. So a lot of challenges there. We've worked through them over the last 2 years, and we have a good system now. But I would say it's one of the biggest challenges when working with Enfors data, and I think that anybody who's tried to do GIS analysis on it has experienced that. And I think it's another example of showing, it's a pain point for local jurisdictions to have to do that, and they can just go to FireCares and see heat maps of statistically significant clusters for call volumes, and do some basic GIS analysis like call routing, all from firecares.org. You don't need to load all this stuff into your local GIS software. So another kind of value add there for the FireCares application.
So you've taken that pain point away in many cases, where it's why suffer again? Go benefit from the hard work that you guys have done in your system.
Yeah, and we allow you to easily kind of visualize your call distribution over the last 12 years. And so you can see, the time of day, for example, that your calls typically occur in versus the day of week versus the years. And so, and as Craig was saying, it's really interesting to see some of the variations in a single department from year to year with their Enfors data. I mean, they'll go from 1,000 fires a year to 200 fires a year. And it's like, how is this even possible? And so I mean, there's just so much variation in it. And most of the departments that we show this to have it's not frustration, but they have some questions about where does this data come from, and it all comes from your Enfors record. So if you sidestep some of the reporting there, at the end of the day, it comes out in our system looking like you run less fires or more fires. And so it's really interesting once you start giving that data back to the end user, how it affects the overall story for them.
Well, and I think you just hit the biggest key, I think, right there. And I know Lori and I have talked about this before, and I love her passion for it. And it's just the concept of data quality. And I see this as being a total launch point for even the street level firefighter or the recruit. If you can see the power on the other end visually, then maybe you'll understand why you have to care on the front end. So talk about that a little bit, the data quality issues and where we need to go.
Yeah, Steve, obviously, as you said, you and I have talked about this many times, and I think Tyler just hit on some of the data quality issues that we've encountered. And he didn't even mention that in the geocoding, even to the top level geocoder, the most, going to the street level or whatever, not even the accuracy or the precision that we wanted, we could still only geocode 80%. So there are 20% of the fires that we have that we weren't even able to geocode. So that's another basis of the quality. We looked at fires and fire spread that Craig mentioned earlier. We found departments, if you began to dig down in certain departments, where they were coding to object of origin or calling it a cooking fire when clearly they had suppression efforts. But if we called it object of origin or just a cooking fire, food on the stove, whatever, then they don't fill out that fire module. If the fire module wasn't completed, then it did not go in our system as a fire. So we saw, and we talked to a lot of departments where they said, we make a lot more fire than that, than we're showing in our system. We have no doubt that's true, but they weren't putting in data that show it's a fire. So I go back to the premise of the data quality. It does start with them, but we have made data input so burdensome over the years that firefighters are never going to do this in the way that they are mandated to do it today. That's why we only have a little over 50% of departments reporting at all. And we've got to change. We have got to take firefighters out of the data entry business. We've got sufficient technology to do so. We have got to find another way, and we have got to maintain a rule that says we need the must-have information, not the nice-to-know information. And so we've got to cull back down and do some data mining on the front end of what we must have, and our operational data is part of that. And that's what FireCares is going to begin to highlight also, the need for that operational data. When Craig described some of the performance score, you'll note that he said we used some data, what we could glean that was usable, and then we had to use science to get the rest of that performance score. We need real data. We need to know when you have water on fire. We need to know when you have completed a primary search. These things that matter on the fire ground when firefighters show up. What do you do when you show up? That's what's going to matter to decision makers. That's what's going to matter to resource deployment. And so as we go forward, we've got to think about different ways to handle this type of data. We can still do cause and origin. We can still do item first ignited. Not a problem. And those are things that I think if you have the data conversation, that there are concerns about still getting that information. I think that's absolutely doable. In a dynamic record where we can have the CAD system contribute, we can have an officer contribute, we can have then an investigator where they exist contribute to a dynamic record. And that's what we're working on in a parallel project with FireCares in the Enfors project, the Fire Operations Reporting System.
Sure. So, well, we got a couple end users here. I mean, we've got a couple levels within the Howard County Fire Department. Robin, a firefighter at Ellicott City, and Chief, you deal with these data issues all the time, I'm sure, because at your level, you need it for decision making. So, I mean, let's talk about your thoughts on the. I mean, I agree with Lori. It's 2017, right? I can pick up my phone right here and listen to all the calls you go on. Why can't we do better?
Yeah, well, any department, I'm sure, all over the country, they're looking to measure their performance better. And in our quest to do so, you know, we uncover lots of issues with what we collect and how we collect it. And geez, we get a number for this, but it's not necessarily an accurate representation of what it really is. And just water on fire. Right now, we're a jurisdiction that we do not collect water on fire as a time-stamped event. We've been talking about it for about a year now, and you know, there's some controversy over, well, how accurate is that going to be, because your crews are inside fighting fire, and when is somebody going to know that? We think we can get it relatively accurate, and I think something's better than nothing when it comes to water on fire. The traditional ones are pretty easy, you know, but fire under control, very subjective, right? I mean, but everybody reports it, fire's under control, but it means something very different to one incident commander than it might mean to another. So as a jurisdiction, it starts with policy, but you have to define what it is you're trying to get them to report, and then you have to teach. Yeah. And it's a process to try to get to data accuracy.
But I think what we're seeing here is we now have a vision of what it can look like on the other end if you do it well, and how you can benefit from it. So I think that might be a little added motivation.
Feedback works.
Yeah. Well, and from the guy entering the Enfors report, Robin, I mean, you've done this in many places across the country as you've been a member of different departments. You learn the tricks pretty quick, right, of how to skip module, the fire module and everything else?
I would never admit to actually doing that. However, you could call it fortune or misfortune. Ellicott City happens to be my 6th volunteer fire department, so I've been a new guy 3 times, or I've been a new guy 6 times, and I'm still working through, but it also gave me a great vision of what it looks like, at least on the East Coast and then out in Illinois, for entering this type of information. And you're absolutely right that it's completely different based on the individuals and their organization and how they've decided they want to collect the information, where the information ends up needing to go in the end, who's responsible for entering the information. And we can go from one department where I, as the first in lieutenant, was responsible for doing the entire fire report, to another spot where, as the first lieutenant, all I had to do was put my crew's names into the data, and that's all that went in for that particular jurisdiction. So Howard County is actually, from my experience, is way ahead of the curve with their ability to give information to their firefighters. I mean, their RMS data is available on a website for their firefighters to log into, and they can actually track real time what's getting entered into their RMS. And just seeing that in itself has given the firefighters a appreciation for the ability to go in and look at what data is collected and what it does. They've got some phenomenal runtime statistics. I was showing some of the volunteers in my department the other day where I can go in and pick a date range and tell you what the turnout time was for my particular apparatus. And all of a sudden that's become a little bit of a bone of contention, one engine versus the other, that, you know, we're getting out the door on average in 1 minute and 15 seconds, and it's taking you guys 2 minutes. You know, we're obviously much better than you are at our jobs. But that's interesting how that information, but it's seeing it that's giving them that appreciation to be able to do it. So FireCares is just another level on the national basis where you can take that information that is interesting to the line firefighter and we really want to be able to use, and we're learning how to use it, but put it into a national database that allows you to be able to take a much larger look at the information. Because as Craig said, when you have that large amount of data, you can start to see trends. If we look at my particular station and we happen to go on, let's say 15 fires over a year or something like that, and 5 of them we actually did something on, that's a very small set of data. But when we get into the millions of fires, now we can really easily start to see trends stick out, and the data becomes much more useful.
Yeah, Robin, another point is, over the last couple of years, and actually even before when I was working on the staffing studies while I was an engineer at NIST, you start to talk to fire service personnel and you show them what we're doing, and all of a sudden, like the flip switch, it switches in their heads and, oh, this is why we're doing this? Because there's so many times anecdotally I'll be talking to a firefighter and I'll ask them about their Enfors data or anything. I'm like, I don't know, no one ever does anything with it. And I'm like, wait, we are doing something with it. And then I show them, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, I'll care more now that there's something going on in it and there's some tangible impact or something that we can see. We were also talking to a couple of departments in terms of how they viewed their fire spread category. And there's one department that said, we're gonna fill it in because anything in object, room, floor, or structure is still technically contained in the structure. And so they filled out everything is contained in the structure. Technically, that's correct.
Wrong. Yeah.
Right? I mean, technically, by definition, they were not incorrect. But when you start to analyze them relative to other departments, all of a sudden you said, wait, this doesn't reflect my perception and all the rest of their data when you start to look at the department. And those are things that we could see. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, we can change that. I mean, but the tough part, and this is might lead a little bit into Lori's pitch for Enfors, is the lag for getting national data is significant, and ideally we would love to have data coming in a more real-time fashion so that we've got a platform now. How do we, if they make change, if a department decides to make a change, how do we show them that change is having an impact? Whether it's positive or potentially negative, we want to make sure that we get the impact of those changes back to the fire service as quickly as possible when it matters. Yes.
Yeah. So what are you at now for data in there, Craig? What is the bench line? So if I go on there today, how far have you gotten for the data? And am I looking at stuff that happened yesterday, or is it like 10 years ago? Where are we at?
We're somewhere in between. So the last fully incorporated data set is 2014 data nationwide. We're currently, as Tyler mentioned, we're working on geocoding and ingesting the 2015 data. So then we're almost like a year behind. But we're going to be working a little closer with USFA and things to ingest Enfors faster. And this is where Lori can kind of touch on Enfors and the potential of being able to ingest things is a little faster than kind of the 2-year lag where we currently sit.
Yeah, and just to add some clarification to that, I mean, we get the Enfors data sets 2 years after or 2 years behind, right? So we just got the 2015. It takes us a couple weeks to process it. So we have a pretty good, after doing this for 2 or 3 years now, we're pretty good at processing it, getting it into the system, rerunning all the models, and getting the data published. So it's really like that 2-year kind of timeline is really challenging for us because, like Craig was saying, I mean, there's some of the most progressive departments in the country that were just, putting in their fire spread wrong. And now they're fighting 12 years worth of data. They make an improvement tomorrow. They're not going to see it for 2 more years. Plus they got the 12 years to contend with. So that's something it's a real challenge from our perspective. And it's something we're trying to, make sure we take into account from our end as well that, hey, they need some way to improve it quickly because and this could even be technology. It might not even be people, putting it in as confined to the building of origin. It might just be the technology programmatically chooses that if it's not chosen or something. So there's some real challenges here. We want to make sure that it's as accurate as possible and we're not penalizing departments, forever based on the last N number of years worth of data. So.
And that's a good point, Tyler. Just to add to that, as he said, we just got 2015 data. And my pitch is again, Steve has heard many times, we can no longer have decision makers making decisions off 2-year-old data. And even if we update today, you're still contending with, we're still at least a year and a half behind. So the Enfors process and what we've been doing in parallel in the National Fire Operations Reporting System is developing individual modules. Each of these modules stand alone, but then they can incorporate together. So basically the first 2 modules that are being field tested, the first is what we're calling the Enfors CAD. It hooks in with your computer-aided dispatch or your RMS or data warehouse. Basically, we can talk to anything for data exchange. And it will also, we can receive data at whatever intervals you want. For example, Richmond Fire Department, we've been working with them for field testing since October, and we receive their data every 5 minutes. We're working with LA County to plug in now. We'll be receiving them. They've indicated they want to do it every 30 seconds so that they can have the analytics. You see, Enfors has its own analytics with it. So it's a standalone system. But as Tyler indicated, we're going to be working to leverage that new line of data into the FireCares system. So eventually, in time, we will connect these two, and that's always been the intent. So we'll have to stay where we are with analyzing and dealing with FireCares for now until we get the programming from the Enfors data that we're receiving ready to feed into FireCares Live. But Enfors, meanwhile, again, has its own analytics systems that fire departments can use, and they will get it instantly, instant feedback with some of the analytics. The second module that we have is the firefighter exposure module. We have worked with OSHA, NIOSH, University of Arizona, University of Miami, Washington State, all of the people who either already have an exposure app or in the business of building one, came in, sat with us, and we went through what information do you need for firefighter, either surveillance for cancer, for looking at exposure for more acute situations. And we have built now an exposure module that firefighters will be able to download on their own personal devices. We'll work with departments to implement the policy for them to have this for their firefighter career exposure diary. Also, it will give the department some information back in aggregate about, patterns. If we see, okay, firefighters aren't wearing gloves, you need to deal with this. If you, face mask in overhaul, CBAs in overhaul, things like that, that we can see in aggregate. But it also will give us some information at the national level for our cancer researchers to be able to look, at surveilling you over your career. You get cancer, now you've got a diary of all your exposures for your career. And so that app is ready to be field tested. So Tyler has been working on that pretty exclusively over the last few weeks to get this ready. It links in with CAD. So with the CAD module in place, the exposure module in place, then we will look at, pinging your phone, or at least you'll know which you were dispatched to this event. We ping your phone, say, we know you went on a fire basically, and you fill out your exposure app. We built in business analytics so that if you say, for example, there was no exposure, then you don't fill out anything else. There is a behavioral health portion of the exposure app as well. We had a lot of the experts say we've got to start calculating or at least gathering data on these behavioral health exposures. So if you experience a traumatic event, say everything, anybody that deals with a child, either in a fire or an EMS event, seems to have some, traumatic exposure for that. So we want to begin to document that as well for the PTS issues that could occur in your career. And so this is the exposure app, and this is really the impetus that a lot of departments want these. So these 2 modules are ready. We're working with departments literally one by one, plugging them in. There's no cost involved with these 2. The 3rd module is the incident module, and that will then still gather, it's the incident or investigation module. We'll be working with the fire marshals, National Fire Marshals Association, to develop that. And that'll be the 3rd that will hook into these other 2 that give us the full span now from operations to your exposures, to the investigation of the event, giving us cause and origin, item first igniting, all that important information that we still want to gather on the incident itself. So that's Enfors in a nutshell. I'll see if Tyler or Craig want to add anything to that.
No, I think that was a good overview. I mean, it's allows us to, now firefighters to track every single incident they've gone on and look at trends over, your entire career, exposures over your entire career. And so I think at the end of the day, it's going to allow firefighters to do a lot more and realize this kind of big picture, things that are occurring with them, throughout their entire career. So yeah, I think you did a great job describing it though.
So I would just add, Steve, that if fire departments are interested, we have begun to, as they see FireCares, we talk about Enfors. So fire departments are saying, how can I get that? Can we plug in now? The answer is yes. So if they're interested in having the CAD module plugged in and then getting the exposure module prepped for their firefighters, then we are ready to work with them. So just contacting us through FireCares, and there's some FAQs on the FireCares site that will lead them to the Enfors site, and we should have that website operational within the next week or so.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, as a fire researcher, thinking of, I mean, we kind of, I mean, how reactionary are we, right? So we're looking at 2-year-old data, or we're watching websites and we're trying to figure out the topics that need attention. This gives us the ability to potentially start finding trends and addressing trends and improving firefighter safety almost real time, or at least within weeks or months, and not waiting for NIOSH reports to come out, or looking at trends in maydays or firefighter injuries and things like that, where this will begin to capture that. And then we need to start looking at ways of having grant money available so that we can be flexible in that we can respond to, let's say, what IAFF says is the problem right now. And we start addressing it when we see it versus waiting a year or 2 to have the resources to be able to do something about that. So this changes the game for a lot of things, for sure.
I agree with you. And I tell you, the first to recognize that was Jeff Burgess, and he has the grant on cancer surveillance at University of Arizona. And it's a DHS, one of our same grants that you and I have had in the past. And Jeff said, can we use this for this study? And the answer was yes. And so that is, we're implementing now in the departments that have been selected into his study. So we're working with them now to implement the CAD module and get them ready for the exposure module. Both of the 2 big departments, Tucson and Boston, with their new recruit schools. So we are going to start with these firefighters from the day they come on the job. So I think that's a very exciting proposition for us and for Jeff.
All the things that we wonder about and wish we had when we started to, it's creepy. So if you're out there and you're watching us and you're and plugged into the Twitter hashtag FETalk, if you have a question for the FireCares team, we do have one question that came in from Amy asking, the FireCares GIS mapping is incredibly interesting. Do you see a correlation in trend of fires to population? So she's already looking to cross a couple data sets. Any thoughts there? I mean, the tool is certainly set up to begin to make those comparisons.
Yeah, so from my kind of experience right now, I've kind of looked kind of within departments. So I've seen trends, within a particular department to say you can look at population density. And one of the really cool features we have is when you pull up the map there for any given department, and there's like 3 slices of paper in the upper right-hand corner, and you can click that. If you click off the jurisdiction boundary to start with and load in the parcels and the heat map, and I think you have to zoom in probably 2 or 3 times to load, just because the amount of data that's going to be loaded onto your screen is tremendous. And I would recommend going to your full screen map because it's really interesting. But what we did was, where we could, we essentially mapped every parcel to the type of risk that it would fall in based on NFPA's categories for structures. So we have low, medium, and high risk structures. And typically you can tell, like, your high risk structures tend to be your high rises or your mid rises, things that have a higher population density. And you can even just see by the size of the parcel sometimes the density that looks like, and you don't see parks, you see all houses. And then you could overlay the fire heat map. And so now you've got GIS coded fires, and they're coded where, as they start to cluster, they'll go from green dots to yellow dots, typical heat map fashion. And so you could start to overlay your actual fires in that community historically, and you can filter based on different years if you wanted to underneath the map, and you could overlay that based on the inherent risk of the structures that they're landing on. And so that's a really cool feature that we've started to look at, and you can start to see, and it does vary somewhat differently by community. I really haven't spent much time, to get back to the question, directly looking at the macroscopic view. I mean, most of the stuff I've looked at has been on the community level. It's interesting in developing the tool with this team. You spend so much time developing that sometimes, like, we really haven't sat back to kind of look at the large scale effects yet, because we're still trying to make sure that every community's data is correct, that their fire stations are correct, the jurisdiction boundaries are correct. So the maintenance and development of the site has kind of been paramount to some of the bigger picture analytics. But we really hope to as we get more users and more interaction with everyone, that we'll be able to see those trends just kind of occur based on the discussion we're having with users, and in hopefully less and less debugging of features as we move forward.
Yeah, and I would kind of agree with that. Most of the analysis I've done is kind of anecdotal, departments I've worked with, but I have seen some interesting geospatial data, and I think Craig pointed me to this one. There's one department out west, I'm not sure which one it is, but you could tell in the distribution of structure fires, there was a spike one day, and you look at that spike and you can actually click on it and see it must have been, I don't know if it was a wildfire or a really bad structure fire, but it had like 6 or 7 exposures to it. And so, I mean, just by looking at the data, you could say, like, that was a bad day. You could very easily pinpoint, essentially the worst fire they've had in the last, 5 or 12 years. And so you do kind of notice some interesting things like that and some interesting trends in the data. So it's, I agree. I haven't looked at it from a national standpoint, but I really enjoy going just from department to department and seeing what kind of stuff you can find, because some interesting things around there.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. I mean, I suspected it was likely a wildfire, as it was like an entire street that abutted a kind of like a park that you would see on a Google map. So it was definitely the wildland. It was definitely forest or some kind of wildland type feature. And then it was along kind of a 2-block path. You saw all these houses all triggered on the same day. And then we do have time of day in the in your filter, so you can say, okay, well, it was this month, this day, and this time frame. You're like, okay, this was all kind of the same big fire call. And so
2 years from now, you'll be able to see that in the suburbs of Kansas City as you look at the fire they had there with the building under construction, the number of houses that caught on fire because of that. That'll be the next thing that'll pop out of the map. Robin brought up an interesting piece, and I think we see this a lot, is the motivation of competition. And whether it's at the department level, whether county, region, whatever the case is, there's a level of transparency that FireCares brings that, how do you see that that competition playing out? Is it safe grade versus safe grade? Is it, I mean, are we going to start seeing data quality improve so we're comparing apples to apples? You want like communities to be potentially motivating each other to be more fire safe. How do you see that playing out?
Well, that's a great question. I think that every time that we have done demonstrations of FireCares, we've had that happen when you have two departments standing side by side and they all want to see their scores. The first thing they notice is a performance score, and I think because that's sort of the bright spot really of the entire page when you open it up and behind login. So they all want to look at their performance score. One of the things that we're very careful in doing, because that's going to happen naturally, is make sure everybody understands the quality of the fire data that we have in there now. Again, it's 2 years old. All of your data may not be there. So the first thing we say is, let's see what we have in here for you. We scroll down to the area where we showed the 12 years of data that are actually there. And oftentimes that'll stop the competition because they begin to understand maybe my data is not very good. Until we get better data, then we'll compete, right? And so we try to put that competition off to the future, given that we're sort of strapped with not great data right now. The system is going to be better. The better the data get, the better the system, the more accurate, more precision that we're going to be able to get out of some of the analytics that are there. So that's sort of where I try to steer them, but that competition, it happens every time. So that's a great point. But we want to be very clear that the competition ought to be with getting you better data right now. Let's get you live data, that sort of thing. Get us to that point. Then we can talk about how good you are compared to your peers.
So we've got the NCAA tournament, which is coming to an end, and we've got Metro Chiefs coming up. I mean, I'm picturing a live at Metro Chiefs bracket competition of all of the Metro Chiefs departments battling it out for the best safe grade and best improvement in safe grade and best improvement in data quality from year to year. So maybe we need to start tracking that so that we can really get people motivated amongst their peers so that they are proud of what's going on.
I like it. I like it, Steve. So all things being equal, let's see how good you are.
Oh, yeah. If that happens at the department level with Robin and his the volunteer and the career crew making each other better, I can't wait to see what happens at the larger department level and all the ego and good stuff that's going on there. So we're coming up towards the end. We've got a couple minutes, and before I ask what's next, I guess the question I have, you guys have poured your hearts and souls into this, and I would, what features are you most proud of? What are you most proud of when it comes to FireCares that you want to highlight to everybody that watches this?
Well, I would say the community risk assessment piece is really good. The scores, the 3 scores, it's tremendous to me that it has come to fruition that we at least have a framework. As the data get better, those analytics get better. So we have at least gotten the framework. That was the real goal that we started with in 12 years ago, 2005, when we set out to say, help departments better match resources to the risk events to which these firefighters are going to respond. Because when it comes down to, Steve, you know this, it's all about firefighter injury and death, civilian injury and death, and property loss. Those are the 3 outcomes we deal with every day. They can be good or they can be negative. But if we match well, then we can stay less vulnerable to negative outcomes in those 3 arenas. So to me, that's the big thing, that's the big takeaway. And what I'm the most thrilled about is we've gotten there now. We've got that infrastructure. We get better data, we can get there. And so all about being less vulnerable in those 3 areas.
Yeah, and I would say probably mine is the heat map, just overcoming some of the challenges that I mentioned earlier with the geospatial data. I feel like that gives you a good representation, a heads-up display of where your risk distribution is and how things have changed over time. So I'm especially proud of that one, I think.
I'm going to go with the 27,000, being that we've got 27,000 departments in this site. A few years ago when I think I might have been in an ALTS meeting with Lori, and she initially pitched this concept of FireCares to me, and I was like, Lori, there's no way we can do this. I was like, I could maybe do it on a community. And we had some data, and I was sitting in the lobby with her. We were kind of just coming to foundation of how these scores might look, and messing around on the computer and putting some math to some computer code and generating some things. I was like, all right, well, if I can do it for one department, maybe we can just kind of, expand it a little further. But I was like, this is still, just a text file on my screen. And then a few weeks later, Lori's like, oh, I just met this guy, Tyler, that has Rogue. And I was just like, oh. And then all of a sudden we're like, wow, we can actually do this. And so to have a site, firecares.org, where you can log in, and there's 27,000 plus departments that have a landing page with, their fire data there is kind of just the fact that it exists is kind of the crazy part in my mind, that we've come this far from essentially all these different data sets to pull them together to generate something that is hopefully beneficial to everyone that wants to use it. Is kind of something that I'm pretty proud of.
It's exciting to watch the progress and to see Craig's excitement, and now to hear, I think probably from the last 15 years of Lori pushing for this and talking about what it can be and what it will be, and everyone saying, okay, Lori, that's great, good job, Lori, you go for it, and it just hit a major milestone. So it's really cool to see this, and the call to action, go to firecares.org. There is a plethora of information there. We want the folks that are able to register.
Yep.
And for you to see that it's as good as the information that you put into it. So you guys have been working hard with particular departments as pilot departments to make sure that their stuff is as clean as it can be and that they can get the most out of it. And I mean, Tyler and Craig will probably die with me saying this, but let's do that 27,000 times, right? Let's get all of those departments as clean as they can be and functioning as best as it can be. And as you guys said, this is the baseline. This is kind of week one of a much longer process, we hope. So please visit firecares.org. I want to thank our guests for joining us. I think we learned a lot, and hopefully the listeners and the people watching make a good use of the hour and pass it on to their friends. And you can certainly go watch the archive at fireengineering.com. We've got FDIC coming up in less than 3 weeks. And as usual, we'll all be there. FSRI will be well represented, as I'm sure FireCares will be highlighted, and Lori will be there to answer whatever questions need to be answered. But we've got Dan Madrikowski's got a class as part of the iWomen conference on Monday. I've got a class, the top 20 tactical considerations for firefighter research, that we're going to update for this year and keep that going. That'll be Wednesday morning. Wednesday afternoon, Robin's got a class on what about the victim, using fire research for victim survivability. Keith Stakes, another one of our research engineers, is going to give an update to our fire attack project. Dan Madrikowski on Thursday afternoon is going to talk about a study that Craig helped with on compressed air foam systems in structural firefighting. A lot of interesting conversation around that, so make sure you catch Dan on Thursday afternoon. And then we're going to wrap up our week on Thursday afternoon with our, I don't know if this is the third or fourth, Science in the Big Room, a concept that launched out of us challenging Bobby Halton for never letting us have a big group of people. So we've got Science in the Big Room, where we've got Gavin Horn, Kenny Fenton, Denise Smith, who are going to be with us talking about all the research we're doing on cancer and heart attacks, as well as moderated by Eric Roden, with special guest Jerry Tracy from FDNY retired, Derek Alconis from LA County, and George Healy from FDNY. So if you want a fun group of people to have a conversation with, pretty much in an open mic fashion, please come to that class. So with that said, next 5th Wednesday, I have no idea when that's going to be or if there's going to be one, but you'll find us then talking about the next topic that we think is fun. Thank you very much to Lori and Tyler, Craig, our FireCares team, Chief Jerome, for stopping by and getting thrown into the fire with us.
Thanks for having me.
And so with that, be smart out there.